Hello, everyone. Welcome. You see folks rolling into the session today. We will give everyone a moment to join. As you are joining us, we always love to hear where folks are calling in from. I know we've had people from all over the world join past sessions. Love to hear where you are today in the chat. Feel free to share. Hi, folks. Welcome. Come on in. We will give everyone a moment here. All righty. I know people are still continuing to pop in. Lots of folks like me joining from very snowy Colorado today. I see folks from all over the country and the world, actually. So welcome, everyone. We will go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Marley Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Digital Customer Success here at ESG. I'd like to welcome you to our Customer Success Unlocked webinar titled Divining Coherence in the Noise of Customer Data and the Explosion of Technologies. As usual, I will be serving as your host alongside my co-moderator, ESG's Vice President of Customer Success, Peter Armley. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Marley, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Before we introduce today's guests, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, our session, as usual, will be fireside chat style, interview style, so you won't be seeing slides on screen, but I promise your Zoom is working just fine. Second, we are recording this session, and you will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours. Lastly, highly encourage everyone to submit your questions for our guests at any time throughout the session today. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. Please go ahead and use the Q&A tab on the bottom of your webinar screen to do so. We always love hearing from the audience and what you want to hear from our panelists. So without further ado, I want to welcome our guests today. First, welcome to Scott Brinker, who is the Vice President of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot and editor of chiefmartech.com. Thanks for joining us, Scott.
Excited to be here.
And welcome to Mark Stouse, Chairman and CEO of Proof Analytics. Great to have you, Mark.
It's great to be with you.
So I want to really get rolling into this conversation because I think it's going to be really interesting, and I know I'm super excited to hear from you both. So to kind of kick us off, knowing that most of our audience today is in the customer success space, right? And certainly some marketers joining us as well. I want to talk about the synergies between those two organizations. I think there are a lot. Something I am very passionate about and love to talk about. So really want to hear from both of you. Mark, I'd love to start with you. I know you've been an executive both in the customer success space in the past and in the marketing space, and now as a CEO. So I really want to understand how you see the relationship between marketing and customer success, similarities, challenges, opportunities for continued collaboration, any of that. Let's go to you first, Mark.
Sure. I mean, I think that, particularly in the B2B space, right, the mission of marketing is to help sales. There's also kind of a customer version of what I'm about to say here, right? But help sales sell more product to more customers faster and more profitably than sales could do by itself. The mission of customer success is to engender confidence and trust on a broad scale throughout the customer life cycle, right? On behalf of the vendor, right? It is a relationship in, an enduring kind of thing, right? So I think one of the mistakes that at least from my perspective, that I see a lot in customer success teams is that they define themselves much too narrowly. A really first-class executive briefing center program is as much a part of CS as anything else that CS is more known for, right? Communities, same thing, right? And so these two things, and actually let's take it in the context of marketing, sales, customer success, and product management, right? So these are all kind of moving together across time and space. Two of them, customer success and sales, are linear value creators, and product management and marketing are nonlinear value creators. And they are designed in a sense to work this way, right? The last two being multipliers of the first two. And so they create value asynchronously across time and space. Customer success is creating, among other things, the goodwill, the support, the references, all that kind of stuff, right? That then marketing and sales get to blow out into a wider awareness, right? So this is all ultimately manifested in the power of brand. It's not that demand isn't important, but the power of brand to move the company forward in the minds and hearts of people, right? And part of that is awareness, part of that is confidence, part of that is trust. Those three things come out of decision science research. So they weren't created by me, and they weren't created by marketers. They were created by actually some guys at Princeton who first started looking into this whole thing. And if that sounds suspiciously like brand, like a definition of brand, right? I think that's a very defensible idea, right? And so that's kind of the way I see all this. And then through the lens of the analytics that we see customers doing with our platform, it really, you can really see how all this kind of dovetails together.
Absolutely. And I think I love that you brought in, product and sales as well, because, we're talking about marketing and customer success, but neither of those organizations live in a silo, right? The whole point is to become part of that larger ecosystem together. So I love that. Thank you, Mark. Scott, what are your thoughts here? Where are there opportunities for marketing and customer success to learn more from each other, work more together, get along better?
Yeah, so much opportunity. I feel like there's so many like massive trends that have been multi-decade trends, that are the tailwinds to customer success. The first being one of the fundamental truths of the internet, that we've become acclimated to it, but we should really consciously bring this to the forefront again, is it changed the power of buyers. It used to be that, the information asymmetry, between sellers and buyers was so much in the favor of sellers. And one of the biggest revolutions of the internet, is it really allowed customers to have this very strong voice out in the world. And, everything from reputations, what's in search, what's appearing in these communities, buyers are looking now to the ground truth of okay, well, what's actually happening with this, product or this company? And as a result, the single most powerful thing you can have as a part of your brand, as a part of your company's growth, is happy and successful customers, and while marketing has a role to play in that, and sales has a role to play in that, and product has a role to play in that, obviously customer success is really the owner, of that. And I agree completely with Mark, you want to think of that at the widest possible scale. The other place where I think there's this sort of decades long trend that is such a tailwind for customer success is, I've often talked about this, I've framed this as Martech's law, but it's not unique to Martech. This pattern appears everywhere, and I'm certainly not the first person to have identified it. But it's this idea that technology changes at an exponential rate, more or less, right? Like Moore's law, doubling of computing power every couple of years or so. Lots of other ways in which we feel it just around us. It's just constantly changing. Organizations do not change at an exponential rate. We kind of change, maybe, I don't know, if you're going to take a guesstimate at, you might say it's kind of a logarithmic curve. Change is hard, and so we all find ourselves, pretty much in every business where these two curves juxtaposed against each other. We have all this change, that's happening in potential enabling technology, but our ability to actually adapt and adopt and harness that, it's just hard. And again, this is one of the things, there's no silver bullet to that. You have to be really conscious about which choices you choose to embrace and, other things. But I feel like the customer success mission is really focused on helping customers solve this, to say like, listen, buying the technology, buying the product, yes, it's great. There's great possibilities here. But part of what we're here to help you do is actually absorb the organizational change to be successful with it. And so I think even if you only take those two things, and we could do a whole long list of, others as well too, I think this alignment of customer success really at the heart of the customer relationship, and any marketer worth their salt today will say like, yes, the true customer centricity, as acknowledged by our actual customers, not just what we want to, write copyright on a brochure, is the key to really successful marketing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say, just to feed into exactly what Scott's point was, which was awesome. There's brand new research. So we've been talking about the people, process, technology triangle for ages, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably as long as any of us have been in the business, right? And it's been widely understood in most places that this was not an equilateral triangle, that it was heavily scalene, right? But I think this new research that's coming out right now, I saw a post by Kathleen Schaub, who is a former IDC analyst she's still very active and really super smart. But she was talking about this new research that shows that the people part is 4 to 5 times the impact of the other two. And this has some really profound implications for vendors. One, it means that your ICP is probably still too big, right? So one of the things that they were talking about is that you need to be selling to customers who are actually ready to be successful with your product.
Mm-hmm.
And the other big one is that, from most of our careers, if a product implementation failed, it was seen as a fault of the product, when it probably actually isn't. In fact, it's almost assuredly not, right? And it's a product of the customer team, right? That's the issue. But the vendor compounded the issue by selling them something that they weren't ready to implement successfully, right? And so this is where customer success really starts to become strategic, right? Regardless of whether you're measuring it in terms of retention versus churn, or whatever. There's lots of different approaches to it. But the reality is that if you're not also using your customer success insights to power your ICP and thus to power your marketing and your sales, you're going to have some problems later.
So maybe that's a nice kind of segue to the next question then, because Mark, you talked about a loosely defined or too loosely defined ICP, and that kind of makes me think about what Scott mentioned about a magic bullet. There are none, but some people argue that maybe there is one kind of emerging pretty quickly, and it's artificial intelligence. And a recent VentureBeat article showcased AT&T's vision they have for scaling their own AI efforts across the entire organization to truly integrate data and AI into the core fabric of how they run their business. And that sounds amazing and wonderful. But, I think the story reinforces for us that widespread advanced technology adoption is rapidly becoming more mainstream. In fact, Forrester calls AI indispensable in 2023 for B2B businesses. And so we think the winds of economic, geopolitical, demographic change, as you talked about, Scott, all those forces of change, will only accelerate the adoption of technology to help address some of that, the massive change effort that needs to take place. So we'd like to hear your thoughts on whether you share this bullish attitude about AI adoption in business, and with respect to your own particular business focus, which is marketing, what are the inhibitors to AI that company executives need to think about? And so let's start maybe with Scott this time.
Yeah, AI is one of those things that dangerous to predict because, and I just had this happen to me this year. You know, for a long time, I've been in the camp of AI mostly through the lens of machine learning, you know, great set of algorithms that you're able to, you know, put data sets into it. And from those data sets, you know, draw both useful pattern analysis and then extrapolations, you know, into predictions. And I don't mean to like downplay that. Like, I mean, you take a look at a whole series of scenarios where that sort of like insight and predictability, you know, has tremendous value to companies. But it's also like, well, let's not overstate this. You know, it has certainly not like the big grand machine in the sky, you know, that's just making all of our decisions for us, you know, like some sort of episode out of the Jetsons. But then what happened this year that I wasn't really ready for is the things that have happened around generative AI. You know, I mean, things like with the language models with GPT-3 and, you know, like the image generation stuff with DALL-E. But there's actually a whole like range of things that fall into this category. And they caught me off guard because I've been aware of them for a long time, looked at them, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of neat. It's kind of science fair project, you know, like, but it's not like there's anything that's really production scale possible here yet. And this year was a real tipping point for that. You know, where now actually, and you see this incorporated increasingly a whole new generation of products and adding as new features where, I don't know, just pick the concept of personalization. If there's been one, I don't know, like rock that, you know, digital marketing has carried on its back for 20 years, it's like, someday we're going to have actual personalization. But, you know, the reality is personalization, 2 decades on working on this, it's still pretty limited. You know, it's like substitution some things here. Maybe we like make this offer instead of that offer, you know, but it's, you know, but now like some of these generative AI capabilities, I've seen them being incorporated in products where they can take insight on customers, the entire range of capabilities that the vendor has to offer, and like be able to like dynamically like, you know, write, I mean, forget SDRs, like having like, you know, the AI actually generate these emails and engage with people and be able to give them the right stuff. And again, not perfect yet, but actually scarily good, you know, with how I've seen. And now we see all this stuff coming where like, you know, like GPT-4 is going to probably be released before the end of this year or next year, and it's going to take another quantum leap forward in this. And so I'm of 2 minds of this. On one hand, I do think a lot of these technologies, both the machine learning and the generative AI, there's a way in which you can interpret this as, oh, well, this just helps accelerate time for us. Like, you know, we're leveraging these tools as assistants to us as humans so we can do more things faster and better. But I think some of this stuff is going to trip the line where, oh, actually, to really harness this capability, we're going to want to step back and rethink, like, how do we actually even run some of these processes? Like, you know, what's the strategy with this? What's the capability we're trying to develop inside our organization? And so I guess to answer your question, Peter, I'm finally coming around to the answer. Sorry for the ramble, but, you know, is yes, I actually do think this is going to significantly help people achieve, you know, overcome some of these challenges we've been facing. But just as we were talking about with Martech's Law, I think it's going to be easy for us to underestimate how much investment in people, process, like rethinking organizational structure, rethinking like, you know, the strategies and the way we incorporate this stuff. We shouldn't underestimate the amount of effort that's going to have to go into like really being able to harness this stuff at scale, because it's a very new landscape.
Are you known as a bubble burster in your life, Scott?
Bubble burster. Well, I don't know. When it comes to the MarTech landscape, probably most people would say like I'm an offender of like publishing the biggest bubble in the history of SaaS.
Yeah, but we love those. We love those images that you put out there. It's just incredible.
There's always that numerator denominator relationship, right? I mean, I think that Scott on Saturday mornings probably thinks of me as the bubble burster. Right?
True enough.
I like to think of it as a creative, constructive discussion.
Right.
Funny. Mark, what are your thoughts on this question about AI and the future?
Well, so I'll just kind of start in no particular order, right? I think that AI with quotes around it both technically and conversationally, is very amorphous. And what is stacked under that term artificial intelligence changes year to year to year to year, right? So same thing is true with machine learning. Machine learning, the data science community has gotten so uncomfortable with AI as a shorthand, right, that they have started to really talk about machine learning, and they have redefined machine learning to go way beyond pattern matching and stuff like that into things like automation, linear, nonlinear regression even is now part of machine learning, and depending on who you talk to, right? So there's all that kind of stuff. I think that the biggest problem here, though, is that too many business leaders of whatever stripe, of whatever company, think of AI as a magic pill, magic algorithm that you drop into the middle of a data lake, and you come back 3 days later and it has sorted everything, understood everything, cleaned up everything, eliminated all the crap, and all you have left is incredible patterns that instantly, convey value, right? And that's just a fantasy, right? And personally, I think that it will remain a fantasy in my lifetime. I think also you run up against, now there are definitely exceptions to what I'm about to say, right? Financial industry, financial services, definitely an exception. Pharma, definitely an exception. But for the most part, automotive would be another exception. In fact, anything that is heavily regulated is going to be an exception. But everything else, most companies don't have enough big data to run AI of any type, right? Unless it's hyper targeted, like targeting and marketing, or generative AI, or things that are more about the economies of scale than they are about the economies of learning. As soon as you get into the economies of learning piece, which is actually the real power in the age of information, right?
Yeah.
You're now really, you've got to have big data, and big data is not a synonym for I have a lot of data, right? Most companies have a lot of data, but it is lean data. It's very small data sets. It has maybe not a lot of depth, meaning it doesn't go back in time very far, and all this kind of stuff. So it's very problematic outside of a very, very specific little task that you're trying to do. And Scott brought up some great examples where this is actually happening. But if you're going to start running your business or major parts of your business on AI, you're going to have to significantly change your data situation, and not just the volume and depth and all the different characteristics of big data. The whole issue around data management is still incredibly early days, right? I mean, like, it is so easy to get data into a data lake, and it is damn near impossible to get it back out again, right? So what happens is that you have these kind of, it's like shadow data, right? So people will turn their data into the data lake because they know that they have to, right? But they will maintain it over here in flat files, right? And that's how they actually run their part of the business. And so it's I don't know, there's a huge chasm that exists between the way we talk about AI and the realities of AI.
That's
I didn't have, for example, at Honeywell, I didn't have that problem because almost every aspect of Honeywell is a heavily regulated industry, particularly aerospace, where I was, and so we had we had big data coming out of our ears, right? That was not an issue. But if we look at big tech, for example, I was just part of an audit, a data audit in a top 10 big tech company, and I mean they don't really have very much, you know. They certainly don't have a petabyte, you know. They have multiple terabytes. But again, the biggest issue that they have is not how much data they have, but also it's so each data set is very small.
Very small. Yeah. So it's hard to extrapolate any conclusions from kind of those leading data sets with any degree of confidence. So I think the customer success leaders on this show here should take away that AI is a thing. It's definitely a real thing. And it probably does have a really promising future, but don't be fooled into thinking A, it's easy, and B, you don't have to make any kind of organizational or skills changes in your environment. Be prepared like any other major change. It's going to take time. You have to kind of weigh the cost benefit analysis, whether it's going to make sense for your business to start adopting now in some kind of incremental way.
Peter, I would just add this, right? I mean, there are a lot of analytics out there that are lean data analytics, right? Yeah. I mean, classic regression, right, is probably leads that list. You know, you don't have to have a huge amount of observations. That's talking about the total amount of data in a data set, right? You don't have to have a ton of them in order to make that work, right? And I think you also really have to look at this through the lens of how to benefit the business, how to benefit yourself, right? One of the things that we did at Honeywell, because my chairman at Honeywell, Dave Cody, was really interested in what we were all doing, and he was former CFO of GE, so he was Mr. Analytics anyway. And he made a statement. He's like, the whole 95% confidence score thing is bullshit for me, because most of the decisions I make every day are probably way less than that, right? The confidence score would be way less than that. And we actually got an idea, and so we worked with him and we modeled some of his recent decisions, obviously after the fact, right? And the confidence scores were in the 20s and 30s, which is normal, right? Unaided, human experience based, human intuition based, it's going to be in that zone, right? And so if you can double that to the 40s with analytics, you're a hero. Yeah. I mean, you're just absolutely a walk away, solid platinum hero. And that is very attainable. That is not hard at all.
Grading on a curve.
No, exactly. I mean, I think that probably one of the most compelling illustrations of this that I could ever come up with was, if you take a decision that you have to make every day in business and you improve the quality of that decision by 1% per day for a year, the cumulative compounded annual percentage of improvement is approaching 4,000%, right? So we're not talking about a heavy lift here, right? We're talking about something that's very, very approachable and that you can get a lot of value from without a huge amount of complexity.
That's that Einstein quote, like compound interest is like the eighth wonder of the world. So it's kind of like that, but
totally
applied to learning. I love it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about something that I know is on the minds of marketers everywhere, the minds of customer success leaders everywhere. It's the reality of today's business and how customers buy and consume products. So Scott, you actually wrote about this recently in HubSpot's recent State of Partner Ops and Programs paper. So I'm gonna quote something that was in that and want to get your thoughts and Mark's thoughts as well. So the quote here is, "The typical business's buying journey has become more digital, more referral based, and less sales focused. The sales rep only gets 5% of the buyer's time as they go through 28 different touch points on their journey. Few of these touch points directly involve the vendor," end quote. So this is a reality that I think, all of us recognize in today's buyer and today's consumer. We would talk for a few minutes about some of the examples of the kinds of technologies that are at work during that journey, and whether you see customer success being brought into the picture more in terms of, using some of those technologies, especially around referrals, right? Referrals is a big focus for a lot of CS organizations. Curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's so I think it rings true, both, from anecdotally our own buyers' journeys, but there's been enough surveys and enough analysis of enough different folks that more or less keep, coming to the same number, which is asymptotically, it's a large number of touch points and sales controls very few of them,
Yeah.
So I think from a marketing perspective, usually the things we're looking at there is, first of all, content marketing is, became such an engine of growth, in digital marketing for this reason, is because certainly there's a lot of what buyers want to do, customers want to do to self-service. They kind of want to be able to process this stuff on their own time. And so there's a lot of, technologies that have been focused on how do you, first of all, create all this content? How do you deploy it inside the context of your web? But that's just the start, right? It's then how do we get this content out in the world? Where is it appearing with search engine? Because Google is still kind of the default place, if people have a question, as a prospect or a customer, Google is often the first place they start. So, all the technology around managing, search engine optimization, as relevant today as it has ever been. And I think it's interesting in a customer success lens, to be thinking about, just how much we're leveraging our presence in Google to help direct, people's journeys after they purchased.
Yeah.
All of the technologies around communities, people are increasingly talking about community-led growth, in marketing, which, again, really what it comes down to is, yes, you have clusters, whether they're clusters you own, if it's a particular customer base, or even again, clusters that you don't own, but you are a member of some sort of professional, community or, organization or team, and participating in those. And participating does not mean spamming these things. It means being a genuinely helpful, engaging, participant. And again, I think this is something where from a customer success perspective, you already see a lot of customer success people, be the superstars in those communities, but let's consciously acknowledge that is a really powerful strategy, to lean into. Certainly there's all the other social networks, we were debating right before we started this of, what's going to happen with Twitter? This will be interesting to see. But, Twitter has been a great example of a place where people are going to get, feedback, or they're going to get help, or they've got issues, or they're raising it, and so having the technology that's able to listen to these social channels and very effectively be able to capture these moments and help, respond to them, and resolve them. Wow, where am I? I'm just barely getting started. Obviously, all this stuff around live chat. This is something we've seen now across marketing, sales, and customer success and customer service. But again, the quality of that technology, how it's deployed, how well it's orchestrated, when people jump into a chat, who's answering that? If it's a bot, it's a bot, but very often these things also decision tree into human interactions. How do you get them routed to the right people? The age-old thing around call centers is still, very true. There's the internal technologies we use for coordination, when very often, customer problems are not, isolated to the ownership of a particular department. And one last thing, right? Because you started on this thing about the partner ops, is right. most companies have always had an ecosystem, you know, of partners and influencers around them. But most companies had also not been very structured in like, how do they organize that and engage that and harness it? You know, probably the best structured has been when people think about an actual channel for sales, you know, but that's a relatively narrow, you know, set of capability. You know, this other thing of, well, okay, it's not just who's making a sale, but it's who are the different people who are consulting, who are advising, are there other products or services that are related to this, that they're attaching to that, you know? And so there's been a ton of technology now in these past few years around partner ops to help actually be able to like first understand the broader ecosystem network, and then be able to, you know, take a little bit more of a proactive approach to managing it and engaging it. And again, from a marketing perspective, there's a ton of stuff. From partnerships, there's a ton of stuff. But I think customer success has a huge opportunity, you know, to really lean into that like deeper ecosystem view and how it harnesses it, you know, in its evolution with the customer. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there were probably a lot of people in the audience like taking vigorous notes through that. So I love that. Thank you, Scott. Mark, curious to hear, you know, your thoughts on this topic, and maybe dive in a little bit to how that referral component ties in and how you've seen that work too.
I think that part of so we live in a multivariable world, right? And so that means there's a lot of law of unintended consequences type applications going on. And we also are living in a time of great disintermediation. And we've seen that in many different parts of our life. We've seen it in our cultural life, our political life. We've seen it, you know, Facebook was really peer-to-peer for socio-political type stuff in the last, say, 10 to 15 years. And you could argue that has had some good, and it has also had a lot of the other as well. So this is all, so there's just a number of points I would make here. In terms of SaaS, what we're seeing right now is the emergence of a new era of products. This is not just limited to marketing, by the way. It's you're seeing it on a broad basis, for which there is no pre-existing analog version in a given profession, right? So if we think about marketing automation, right? When marketing automation really hit it big, right? It was because marketers could look at it and they could recognize stuff they were already doing, and they could see how this software, you know, both theoretically and in real life, right, was going to scale their operations dramatically. And so it just like any ERP replaces a bunch of manual processes and spreadsheets and all this kind of stuff, right? This has kind of been the thing, right? We do it manually. I'm using that kind of very generically, and then we operationalize it further in software. Today, we are introducing software that does things that no one has ever done in some of these professions before. My company lives in this space, right? Outside of certain B2C customers, marketing mix modeling was relatively rare in B2B. And so even doing it manually, even doing it sort of kind of maybe in Excel, right, was virtually non-existent. And so we have introduced an automated MMM into a market that doesn't have this pre-existing thing to reference, right? Now, finance does, right? So this is one of the reasons why we talk to finance people a lot about the product. But marketing doesn't. And you're seeing this on a broad front. Now, the problem here is that at the same time that all this is going on, right, you're seeing disintermediation of classic influencers, industry analysts, really prominent reporters in the tech space, right? That people used to kind of gut check things with, and for whatever reason, it's not fashionable to do so today, right? And so you go peer to peer. Well, on a lot of stuff, unfortunately, this kind of means, and I'm going to exaggerate it for effect, okay? This sort of means that the blind is leading the blind on a lot of this, right? Now that's not always going to be the case. Clearly, you know, if you're looking at more mature technology, last 5 to 10 years, right, this is probably not going to be the case. But if you're operating more in, say, stuff that's coming out in the last 2 to 3 years, it's going to be a significant problem. And so you're having, this is where customer success comes into it, right? You're having to act as almost like a moderator of all this. You're having to help people be successful and be happy with product, right? The product that they bought. So then they will say nice things on a peer-to-peer basis, and they will give you referenceable stuff that you can use on a public basis. So that then other people will buy, and other people will retain, and other people, you know, and it keeps on going, right? And if you don't do that, if you kind of adopt an unmoderated approach in this area, you are now totally at the, you know, you've got real problems, right? So, but then this is kind of where it keeps on doing this, right? Because a lot of people would say that the review sites, for example, have been extensively moderated by customer success and marketing people, and that they are untrustworthy. Now, whether or not that is true or not is actually unproven. But that is a thought that is gaining currency, right? And so people are very, very, very suspicious of what they're being told by anybody except someone that to them is like them, right? And this is a very hard place to operate in, regardless of whether you're in marketing, sales, customer success, or product, right? It's sort of like there used to be, you know, the big 3 networks, right? And some big magazines and some big newspapers. And those folks, pretty much everybody got their stuff, their information from those folks. And we've all seen that that's totally exploded in the political and cultural life. It's also happened in tech. It's also happened in big decision-making type issues on a broad front. So this is where I realize I'm kind of painting more of the problem than the solution. That's sort of on purpose, right? Because just like what Scott said earlier, there isn't a single silver bullet. This is a multi-pronged, multivariable approach that you have to pursue, and you have to be able to govern it. You have to be able to tweak it in very dynamically back and forth in response to what's actually going on in the marketplace, to include all the stuff that you don't control, right? Which is usually, if we think about this in terms of analytical models, roughly 2/3 of the data that in any really good, solid model is going to be the stuff you don't control. It's the wave that you're trying to surf. So it is very, very complex, but there has never been a more needful time for customer success than right now. Because people are desperate to know 2 things: truth, and I can depend on you.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you used the right word there, Mark. It needs to be governed. And it makes me think of a podcast. You had a podcast, Mark, Accelerating Value. And it's a good one, everybody, by the way. Back in January, Mark and Scott were together on one session. And I'm just going to quote something from that. Scott, you said big ops is less about big data just on its own. So we're talking about big ops versus just like a, marketing ops or customer success ops. Big ops is less about big data just on its own and more about all the apps, algorithms, and analyses, agents, and automations that are all popping up across organizations. Dealing with big ops presents an incredible set of opportunities for companies that want to be more effective and efficient in operating as true digital businesses. So, what Marley and I are curious about is whether the big ops thrust will become a big disruptor in how companies organize themselves. And I think it plays into that last, the answers you guys provided, but I think it kind of extends it a bit. So, meaning if big ops becomes the plumbing for everybody, because it's logical and it provides a compelling financial story, what will that consolidation of operational practices help bring forward the day when organizational silos finally start kind of melting away?
Yeah, well, I should probably disclaim, like, part of why I coined the term big ops was very parallel to, like, when we started with big data. For most companies, that did not mean like, oh, we've got all this huge amount of data and it's all going to be wonderfully orchestrated. What it meant is like, holy crap, there's like data coming out. Like, what is all this stuff? Where do we even put it? And what we, that's kind of the stage we're at with big ops is, I coined the term because, like, you see these ops roles like proliferating all across the business, right? Marketing ops and sales ops and customer success ops, and they're rolling up here into rev ops, and over here we have data ops, and they've got their ML ops teams, and of course the DevOps team who's also working with sec ops and then product ops, and finance ops is going to want to be. I mean, like, we could go down the list. I was just looking at a report this morning from this whole group of thing, like, okay, well, there's this thing now called SaaS ops, just what are the ops we do in IT for managing all of our different SaaS projects? And it's wild. I mean, it is this thing where basically it is all of the, that list you read out of all these different apps and automations and, activities that we're all now have all these different teams doing on top of this digital structure. There's shared DNA among them, like they're doing a lot of the same kinds of motions, but they are not coordinated, they're not connected, and they are very frequently like the interference patterns across these, like, hey, I changed this data that affected something that you were like relying on over here. My expectation is it's actually going to get worse before it gets better, because again, we've just now brought so much technology, to bear on so many different departments. They're all activating all this stuff, and we don't have a good governance for this. If I was a betting man, I would say this is the future of IT. IT is a wonderful, crazy profession that's gone through, as much as any other profession, has gone through some serious, like, just, revolutionary waves. I think at the end of the day, they will ultimately be the orchestrators, of if there is a unification to big ops, it will happen there, but it won't be unification like, oh, IT controls all of this, because it's too much. It's like everyone's doing all this stuff in all their jobs. But that IT is perhaps uniquely positioned to be like that governing provider that says, okay, let's at least have some common frameworks here, and some common understandings of, the access of who's doing what and how this is controlled and what's our common platforms and the standards, huge job. But I think it'll be a part of the next, decade here of how do we get, not that we're great with big data yet, but we're getting, we're much more under control with big data today than we were like 15 years ago. We were sort of at the beginning of that journey on the big ops side, if you ask me.
Yeah, I like that answer about IT having maybe the big role there. I think that makes sense because, for one thing, someone's got to figure out how everything kind of aligns to corporate values, and at least provide that, as you mentioned, a framework for how these things should operate. Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
I think there's two things I would really mention, right? One is sort of an HR concept called T-shaped talent, right? And the move here is not only towards T-shaped individuals, but T-shaped organizations. I think the other one is the economy, right? What the macro is doing and the way these two things are synergizing. So what we see happening right now, it's happening, is the consolidation of functional level ops teams, certainly to include marketing ops and sales ops, but it's way beyond that, right? Into ops. And they're doing this for a couple of reasons. One, they want to drive some cost synergies in the current macro, but also there's been a pretty widespread discussion at the board level, certainly at the C-suite level, that says, you know what, this is kind of crazy because all these different ops teams are executing according to very different principles, very different frameworks. For example, most marketing ops and rev ops and sales ops teams came into that line of work as marketers or BDRs or sales, salespeople who didn't want to sell anymore, or, whatever, right? And so they actually are, they really have come to understand the stack and how to spin the dials on the stack and make the campaigns work and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of economies of scale activity going on there, but this stack and these organizations are virtually headless. And I don't mean that in the IT sense. I mean it in the conversational sense. They are headless in terms of economies of learning.
Okay.
So if you ask the average rev ops, marketing ops, sales ops team, hey, what about analytics, right? What are we using to actually govern the rest of the stack? It's just gone. It's not there. It was never there, right? In too many cases. And so companies are saying the same thing, by the way, is true in HR ops, and in certain ways it's still true in IT ops. I mean, you can kind of, extend this out. So there is this great desire for governance, right? And to create this T-shaped approach in this ops space that says how we do it is not up for discussion, right? How we apply it is totally up for discussion. How, and I think that there's a lot of good in this. There is some really problematic aspects to it as well. That kind of, this is the way I'll wrap this up, right? One of the biggest challenges in this whole area, right, is the fact that the specialists don't know how to talk to the generalists about this, meaning the business people, right? And the generalists or the business leaders don't know how to give the right direction to the specialists in terms of what they need to see. So like, this is the classic divide between business people and data scientists. Data scientists are trying to give them a 95% confidence score equation that the business leaders don't want, don't need, doesn't help them, right? Why? Because it takes data science too long to produce the result. And by the time they get the result, things have already happened.
Yeah.
And then when you say, well, actually, I only need something with like a 40% confidence score, the data scientists freak out and just, go into a
circuit breakers blow all that.
Yeah, and because it offends everything they've ever been taught in academic data science, right? That is happening across ops, all these different ops, right? And so, like, one of the things I find pretty funny as the CEO, the founder and CEO of Proof, is that I still get a lot of recruiter calls. And the recruiter calls are not so much anymore for CMO roles and things like that. The jobs that are being presented to me are all of this whisperer thing, right? This ops focused I am going to stand in the middle of these two groups and these two groups and these two groups, right? And facilitate an exchange that produces something profitable, right?
That sounds very,
Yeah.
that sounds uniquely human, Mark.
Yeah, it is. It is uniquely human. It's something AI is very unlikely to ever pull off.
Right.
Oh no, that language translation AI stuff is getting pretty good. Let's come back in 10 years. We'll have that discussion.
Hey, you know what? We've all lived long enough to see our predictions validated and invalidated many times.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is becoming a new trend at the end of our webinars that I'm going to ask a question that's not really a rapid fire question, but I'm going to ask you to give a rapid fire answer, knowing that we have 4 minutes left in our hour together. So we are seeing a lot of customer success organizations start to really delve into the space of customer marketing, right? And that's still a nascent trend. But it's actually a big focus we have here at ESG with many of our clients, and we anticipate seeing, you know, that take off even further in 2023, looking ahead to next year. So really quickly, 1 or 2 things on what customer success leaders should be learning from marketing organizations if they want these initiatives to be successful. Mark, I'll come to you first.
You gotta learn how to be promotional.
Hmm.
You know, too many customer success people care a lot about the customer, as they should, and otherwise hide their light under a bushel. And that is a huge mistake. The analytics alone, right? When we do the multivariable analytics that includes customer success, the impact over an extensive period of time, right, is substantial. What this really means is that most companies are significantly underinvested in this space. I will tell you that it was such a big deal at Proof, like from the get-go, we knew this was going to be a big deal, that we had 3 customer success people before we had a salesperson.
I love to hear that. You just made my day, Mark. Scott, what do you think? What should customer success be learning from their friends in marketing?
I'll start with this quote from George Carlin, you know, where he's like, you ever notice that everyone driving slower than you is an idiot and everyone driving faster than you is a maniac? You know, I think customer success is an organization that has rightfully felt underappreciated by the rest of the company, that a lot of the other folks, like in marketing, sales, elsewhere, just don't even fully understand like all the things that are going on there and make that successful. I would just caution customer success folks bringing in more marketing in particular. Marketing ops is a huge thing like that. It is deep, the number of things that these teams doing, and so don't underestimate like the process work, the different disciplines and specialties that are all sort of going in to harmonize this. It looks great from the outside, but the inside is yes, like customer success, a fairly complex machine.
Yes, fantastic advice. Well, as we approach the top of the hour, I want to thank you both so much, Mark and Scott. Thank you for joining us, for sharing your perspectives, your insight, your wisdom with our audience. It has been such a pleasure. And I want to thank our wonderful audience, loyal audience, for joining us. A reminder to everyone watching, you'll receive this recording within the next 24 hours in your inbox. And I hope you will all join Customer Success Unlocked again next month, when Peter will officially be taking the reins as host, as I head out on an extended maternity leave. Peter, I can't wait to join as a member of the audience this time.
Are you actually going to watch? That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Thank you
for having me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Mark, Scott, I knew this would be a wonderful conversation. You guys did not disappoint. Appreciate it.
Thank you.